Dr. Marshall Goldsmith said, "If you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you." This is something you cannot escape. You're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and your input shapes your outlook. Your input is anything that comes in. Information, food, experiences, anything that comes in literally becomes you. It becomes your physical body, but it also becomes your mental body. If you are letting in garbage, then your mind is becoming a garden filled with weeds. And whatever you let in ultimately is going to produce fruit. So your input shapes your outlook. And so this is why your environment shapes you. You can't escape that. Your environment shapes your thoughts, it shapes your goals, it shapes your identity. The author James Clear said that thoughts are downstream from environment. So whatever environment you have and whatever information you're consuming, ultimately that's what's shaping your thoughts. It's what's shaping your goals, it's what's shaping your beliefs, it's what's shaping your identity, it's what's shaping who you are. This is why you're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. What the research has found is that your peer group determines your income level, whether or not you're religious or spiritual, whether you're an alcoholic, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you graduate well in school. Your peer group determines so much about yourself, as does the information you consume, the people you consume, the food you consume. And so you've got to start questioning initially what you consume. And in this video, I'm going to share with you a few powerful strategies for upgrading your situation, upgrading your environment. The first is strategic ignorance. The truth is that you don't necessarily need to be aware of everything going on in the world. Most high achievers aren't aware of most things that are going on, because if you're too aware of everything going on, this doesn't mean you should be radically ignorant or radically uninformed. It means you're strategically ignorant. It means you know that for the most part, most things outside in the world are out of your control. And so you focus on the sphere that you can control. This is a big problem in today's world because we're so hyper-connected that we know what's going on all over the world, versus in the past, we knew what was going on in our local community. And so we get stressed out when something bad happens like 5 states away or across the world. And yes, it's important to be globally connected. But at the same time, if we're getting hyper-stressed and freaking ourselves out and creating the fight or flight response because of something that happened 5,000 miles away, then we're going to constantly be in a stress state. And so this is why most high achievers don't consume mainstream news, mainstream media. They don't scroll through their newsfeed, because think about it. Most of that is created at a low level. It's created out of a level of fear, a level of pessimism, a level of scarcity and a level of victimhood. And so why would you, as someone who's trying to create a better life for yourself, consume content that's created by people at a level of scarcity and of emotional fear and hate? You wouldn't do that, because whatever you consume, you consume the energy of it as well. And so you block that out. You don't watch mainstream news. You don't watch mainstream media. You actually get your media from better sources. And so the first one is just strategic ignorance. And there's a lot of research on this. There's a great book actually called The Paradox of Choice, showing that the more options you think you have, ultimately the less you're able to make high quality decisions. And so ultimately you want to cut off most of the information that's available to you so that you can be fully aware of what you're trying to create for yourself, for your family, for your life. If you have too much stuff coming in, which is ultimately sending your brain in 1,000 different directions and ultimately creating a state of fear and uncertainty and confusion for you, then you can't be in a flow state. You're ultimately creating for yourself what's called decision fatigue. You're throwing too much stuff in your brain, you're heightening your stress, you're throwing your brain in 1,000 different directions, and you're ultimately consuming a lot of stuff that's freaking you out over stuff you can't control. Instead, you want to be strategically ignorant. You want to be unaware of most things, because most things are irrelevant to you and to your goals. You want to focus on and consume information and media that ultimately helps you. There's actually a lot of research on this subject when it comes to hope. People who are high hope, they consume media that relates to their goals. If they're trying to, for example, build their financial wealth, they consume media and information that helps them build their wealth. Whereas people with low hope, they actually specifically consume media that justifies their not having hope. There's a lot of media out there. I would say most of the mainstream media is actually targeted towards killing your hope, killing your belief that the future is going to be better. There's a lot of important research on the subject of the concept prospection. Prospection is the idea that whatever view you have of the future, that's what shapes your attitudes, your motivation, and your behavior in the present. And most media actually is intended to make you feel more uncertain and more fearful about the future. A lot of that media is to make you feel like the future is going to be worse than the present. And if you believe the future is worse than the present, then how do you think you're going to feel in the present? That's actually the opposite of what high achievers do. High achievers consume media that makes them realize their future is bigger than their past. As Dan Sullivan said, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. Well, people with high hope, they study information that helps them think better, that helps them focus better, that helps them actually tangibly know how to achieve their goals. One of the big differences, again, between high and low hope people is that high hope people, they're very clear on their goals. They want accountability, which is also another aspect of environment. You want an environment that holds you accountable to your goals. You want to be clear, explicit about your goals, and you want people who hold you accountable. You also want to be in relationships where there's a higher expectation. Again, that's called the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect says that we're either rising or falling to the demands of those around us or to the expectations of those around us. So people with high hope, they've got clear goals, they want high accountability, they're also constantly studying information that ultimately helps them to achieve their goals, and they avoid, or they're strategically ignorant of information that ultimately tries to tear away their hope and their confidence in their future. One other key aspect of this, and it's super deep and interesting, is that low hope people, they don't want to learn new methods or ways of achieving their goals. Instead, they keep trying the same way over and over and over again and expecting a different result, which is obviously insanity. They're unwilling to learn different methods and means. Basically, what the pure definition of hope is from a psychology standpoint is it's both having the will and the way. You need a clear vision, you need the belief that you can achieve it, but you also need to find a better strategic pathway to getting there. You need a pathway to getting there, and that's why high hope people consume better and better media, is so that they can learn better strategies, mindsets, behaviors that ultimately allow them new and unique ways of achieving their goals. They're not just stuck doing something one way. Low hope people, on the other hand, they're unwilling to learn new things, to adjust their strategies. They're unwilling to learn new ways of doing things. If it's not in their comfort zone, then they're just going to consume media that tells them you shouldn't believe in the future anyways. So that's step one, is strategic ignorance. Blocking out information that ultimately destroys your hope and that's ultimately irrelevant to you so that you can focus on your life and your world and actually move yourself forward versus being caught in paralysis by analysis, being caught in decision fatigue and caught in fear mode about something you can't control. The next one is ultimately strategic remembering. So David Goggins wrote the book Can't Hurt Me. And one of the things that he talks about is the mirror of truth. He talks about staring at yourself in the mirror and being fully honest with yourself. If you're someone who's massively overweight, you've got to be honest with yourself. Rather than just lying to yourself and pretending like you're in shape, stare at yourself in the mirror. But one of the things that Goggins says is putting Post-its on the mirror about your goals, looking at your current self and then looking at the Post-its of your goals. This is a way of strategically designing your environment to remind you of your future self, to remind you of your goals, to remind you of what you want. You need constant reminders all around your environment of who you're trying to be. That's actually why I have this culture wall right behind me. This culture wall is filled with many of my favorite beliefs, many of my favorite values, and it's how I've engineered my environment so that I can ultimately have the life I want. By the way, these culture walls are created by Gaping Void. They're a culture design company. They've worked with many of the biggest companies in the world. It's brilliant. It's amazing. Ultimately, you want an environment that triggers and reminds you of your future self. Most people, they have an environment that triggers them and throws them back into their former traumas, into their former addictions. And so they're around people that keep triggering and reminding them of their former self, of their failures and things like that. And so they can't get out of that loop. The only way to get out of the loop is to cut off the trigger and to create a new one, to create a transformational trigger that reminds you of your future self. That's why Goggins' exercise is so powerful. He stares at himself in the mirror. He's fully honest with himself, but he's also looking at the Post-it notes on his mirror of his goals. Then he straight up gets to work. So the final one is called forcing functions. A forcing function is any situational factor that ultimately forces you to produce an outcome. So the historian Will Durant said that the ability of the average person could be doubled if the situation demanded it. If the situation demanded it. You're, again, either rising or falling to the demands of your situation. And if your situation isn't demanding you to rise up, then you probably won't. But if you can create a situation that forces you to rise up, then you will. So for example, Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law says that work expands or contracts based on how much time you have to give it. So this is why short deadlines really work. If you gave yourself a month to do something, it would take a month. If you gave yourself a week to do it, it would take a week. If you gave yourself 3 days, it would take 3 days. So that's a forcing function, is creating a very short timeline and forcing yourself to do it. Social accountability is another form of forcing function. If, for example, you have a workout partner who's waiting for you at the gym, you're probably going to go. But if you don't have that social accountability, you're very likely to let yourself down. We will let ourselves down more than we let other people down, which is why you want to involve other people in your goals. You want other people to help you achieve your goals. You want to have high accountability, as high hope people have. So you want to have coaching. You want to have mentorships. You want to have accountability partners. You want to have people who are involved in your goals with you so that your performance not only affects your outcomes, but it impacts other people's outcomes. This is another thing that Goggins said. When David Goggins actually started having kids, I think he might have had maybe a daughter, he realized that his performance not only affected him anymore, it actually impacted his family. And that gave him more incentive to get down to work. I can speak from experience on this principle. When I was doing my PhD, my wife and I became foster parents of 3 kids. A lot of people think that having 3 kids would be detrimental to my performance and to my productivity, but the opposite is true because of the Pygmalion effect. Once I had 3 kids, all of a sudden I had this new weight of responsibility forced upon me, and now I needed to rise up. I needed to get things done. Interestingly, I started blogging online the same month, or around the same month that we got our foster kids. And that had been something I'd procrastinated for literally years. I wanted to become a writer for years, but it wasn't until I had that new responsibility heaved upon me. The saying that with great power comes great responsibility is actually the opposite of truth. It's with great responsibility comes great power. You've got to take on responsibility. You've got to take on that ownership. You've got to put those forcing functions in your life. Short deadlines, social accountability, high investment. Think about it. There's a lot of research that shows that the more invested you are, the more committed you become. So if you invest in your goal, if you invest in your future self, you're going to be a lot more committed to that future self. I'm right now training for example, an ultra marathon, and I'm just hiring a coach. And when you hire someone, when you put money down, you start to really have ownership over that thing. You start to identify with it more and more. So whatever your goal is, you want to invest in that thing, and it becomes a forcing function. You want to have high consequences for failure. That's one of the things that they've found with the flow research. People who, for example, are extreme athletes, snowboarders who are hitting huge jumps and flying 100 feet, the consequences for failure could be death, so they lock into an extreme flow state, and then they ultimately can tap into their highest performance. That's what you want to do. You want to engineer situations and environments that put pressure on you. There's a great quote that says, pressure can bust pipes or it can make a diamond. You ultimately want to put yourself in a situation where there's pressure to succeed. It's good, healthy pressure. It's eustress. It's the kind of stress that makes you stronger. A lot of people are just too afraid to create an environment that ultimately forces them to succeed. They're too afraid to publicly commit to their goals. They're too afraid to socially say who their future self is. They're too afraid to admit what they want. They're too afraid to invest in their future self. They're too complacent to remove the negative inputs from their life and to become strategically ignorant and to design an environment that keeps them strategically aware of their future self, such as the Post-it notes. And they're unwilling to apply forcing functions to their life. A forcing function is creating and engineering a situation that forces your hand. It forces you forward, because you know that if you haven't created a situation that forces you forward, that your weaker self will come out and you'll try to get out of it. But if you engineer a situation where it's like, no, you got to show up, you got to do it. You've publicly committed to this thing. Now people know it's coming. Then you've outsourced your motivation to a situation, which is the most powerful thing you can do. So your willpower is weak compared to situations. You've got to design the situation ultimately to pull you to where you want to go. This is why they say that you can't overcome an addiction through willpower. Ultimately, you need other people. You need help. You need support. As Johann Hari said in his famous TED Talk, he said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is human connection. You need other people. You need social support. You need vulnerability. You need what Peter Levine would call an empathetic witness. Someone who's empathetic towards you, someone who can hear you, someone who can help you reconstruct the meaning of your experiences. You can't overcome an addiction through willpower alone. You ultimately need to change your environment and change your system, and you need to get social support, social accountability, and help. Your input shapes your outlook. When you start surrounding yourself with new people, you're going to have new thoughts. You're going to start to adapt to your new environment. That's one of the things that is so powerful about human beings, is how adaptive we are. It doesn't matter how big the leap is from one situation to another. You will quickly adapt to the stresses, the pressures, and the demands of that new environment. I found that when going from 0 to 3 kids, immediately I was able to quickly adapt and adjust. Yes, it was stressful. Yes, it was a shock to my system for a little while, just like jumping in a swimming pool. But when you jump into a swimming pool, you quickly adapt to the new situation. And that's what happens when you change your environment. You quickly adapt, and then all of a sudden your thoughts, your goals, and your identity start to mimic and match your environment. So to repeat the quote I started with from Marshall Goldsmith, if you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. On this page, you can get access to another video where I'll show you how you can create and become your desired future self. I will see you over there. Talk to you soon.